Just needs to get there.
We'll put the lights down.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. I'm going to be talking about Staffa and Fingals Cave. It should be the other way around there because that's the order I'll address them. Historic tourism and prehistoric settlement. It's very much a partnership project, although it's also sort of one of those things that it's just a nice place to work. So we got together and got out once, we did some work, and we went out about 3 or 4 more times. So we've been going for about the last 5 years. So it's with Sian Jones from Stirling University, Tessa Poller from Glasgow University, Daniel Rhodes, who's my colleague in the National Trust for Scotland as the archaeologist, pretty much covers the east and some of the islands in the west, and Stuart from the Glasgow School of Art. So all the logos, obviously funded by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, so thank you very much for part of that funding, and also from the National Trust for Scotland London Members Centre. As Head of Archaeology for the National Trust of Scotland, we have a large portfolio to look after. We have something like 400 islands, islets and sea stacks. Many of them have been the subject of archaeological investigations. One of them that hasn't had quite a lot of archaeological work undertaken on it is the island, or was, the island of Staffa. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Who's a member of the National Trust for Scotland? Excellent. Others, please join so you can pay my salary. It's a charity, so not to be confused. Who's been to Staffa? Right, you can all leave. Staffa is a fantastic island. If you've not been, you have to go. You have to go probably quite soon because it's getting very busy. It's obviously off the coast of Mull and Iona. You can get the boat out from Finnefort or you can get the boat out from Ulva. It's about an hour out in a small boat, so it's an adventure just getting there. So another thing about tourism. It's largely known as for its nature conservation side of things, but we wanted to look at its historic background. It came into the Trust's ownership in the 1980s as a gift from somebody in the States. It's quite a small island. It's only really about 1 kilometre long and maybe about 300 metres wide at its widest. It's got cliffs all the way around it. And of course, one of the main features is the geological formations of the columnar basalt. There, I said it, Clive. It's quite difficult to say, columnar basalt. And of course, it's not mentioned much in the texts, in medieval documents and things like that. If it is, if anybody's got lots of hidden texts that relate to Staffa, please let me know, because I'm not that au fait with them. So it would be good to know if it's out there. I think it's mentioned a couple of times. Obviously, the name is probably Old Norse and seems to relate to the word stave or staff, basically upright, which is a description of the columns of the Great Face on the approach from the southern end. It's largely known, as I say, if you're going to Staffa, there are 2 things you're generally going to see as a tourist. Puffins, unfortunately for me as an archaeologist, is one of the things that most people want to go and see. It really freaks me out when people say, I've been to see the puffins, I don't think I've got time to see the cave. Cave spectacular. Puffins are amazing, actually. It took me 4 years before I went to visit the puffins, and they are pretty cute, and they do come very, very close. But you have to stay away from the cliff edges because they're quite dangerous. Not the puffins, the cliff edges. So it's a spectacular place for wildlife and for visits. So many people are heading out there these days, and in fact the boats that are running have just in the last couple of years increased in size. We have a counter on the island that tells us that somewhere between 65 and 70,000 people are visiting Staffa, and if you go and visit now, you'll see the footpaths are showing that wear and tear. And it is the motorway that does up to the puffins, down to the cave. It's that stretch. The rest of the island has very little grazing on it now, and it's quite a good ecological zone, and it's not as heavily trampled as other places. So this is generally the way that most people approach Staffa in the boat. This is David Kirkpatrick's boat, the Isle Lair. It's pulling into the jetty and disgorging its customers, who then have to climb up the stairs and go along the puffin, or go along the Great Face along to the Fingals Cave. And of course, Fingals Cave is one of the main attractions of the site. It has always attracted visitors ever since its discovery in 1772. I take it existed before 1772. Joseph Banks, pretty much the geologist and ecologist, I think, who was heading northwards, stopped in and wrote about it. He was so amazed. He was taken by one of the locals, and he went out and had a look at it, and he wrote a bit in the Scotsman's magazine, and it was published in Pennant's Tour and things like that. And that just blossomed, and everybody who's anybody from the late 18th into the mid-19th century onwards visited Staffa and Fingals Cave. So we have Turner's painting of Fingals Cave here, although I have to say this was commissioned from Turner, and you know, if I had commissioned a painting like that from Turner of Fingals Cave, I'd have wanted Fingals Cave to be seen. So it's got a little steamer going past it. Of course, that's the way most people visited Fingals Cave. This is William Daniels drawing one of many of the surrounding columnar basalt and Fingals Cave itself, which shows the sort of cathedral-esque proportions of the cave itself. So we've got Turner, Daniel, and we've got Tessa Poller, who did our drone survey, and that was very good. I don't think the Glasgow University guys know that she flew this off the back of the boat. So our fingers crossed that it came back okay. So Banks discovers it. It goes, the numbers of people visiting in terms of historic tourism goes sky high. And of course, Banks also reports that it's called Fingals Cave. He, on the basis of the Gaelic name Anu Fin, which is actually probably means melodious or musical cave, but he took the Fin bit to be to do with Ossian and Fingal, so it's probably not. It's good marketing, great advertising, especially in the 18th century, since there's lots of people following Macpherson's Ossian. So the name also attracts people in terms of the mysterious side of it and the tourism side. So we have a timeline. I like this timeline. This is one of my favourite timelines. Geological columnar basalt, 60 million years ago, Staffa, and then 1772, and nothing in between. And I thought, well, as an archaeologist, even I can fill a bit of that gap. So from 1772, we've had geologists coming out. It was bought by MacDonald of Boisdale. Walter Scott visits. Of course, the famous Felix Mendelssohn's there. Turner, Wordsworth, Keats, King of Saxony. I put that one in because he mentions wooden stairs being built, getting down to the foreshore to get along to the cave. This is MacDonald of Boisdale down the bottom corner here, and his natty get-up with jacket and kilt and something strange on his head. Jules Verne mentions it in his book, The Green Ray, so there's quite a lot of artistic and creative responses to visiting the island. This is an illustration from that book of people going up and down by then the metal staircases. And of course, there's other later musical traditions. If anybody can identify the band, Pink Floyd, seemingly. I didn't know that, but they wrote a song about it. And as I say, it was given to the Trust in 1986, and people are still continuing in large numbers to visit the site. Of course, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of creative responses to Fingals Cave and the Fingolian tradition, and Macpherson and Ossian is part of that. Of course, the main thing to say is right here and now, it's categorically not linked to the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. It's the same geological process, but they happen roughly at roughly the same geological period, but they're not linked. You can't walk under the sea to Northern Ireland. Well, you could, but you wouldn't get very far. So there's been lots of mentions of the place, and of course it's part of this whole romantic tradition about awe and wonder. We've got the sense of the sublime, and many poets are discussing it and talking about it, and other authors. Some of the things that are mentioned are actually the sound of the cave. So we have here the great temple of the Western Main, the Airy Harp by James Hogg, softest music, rolling of perpetual thunder, we like that sort of stuff, hollow roar made by the sea through the caverns. the cavern, sound of artillery. In fact, one of the caves on the island is called the Gun Cave because of a boulder that gets fired up when the waves come in. So it's quite a remarkable and in some cases awe-inspiring and frightening place. Keats, we quite like this one. Keats in that classic way said it was impossible to describe, and then went on to describe it at quite some length. So there's quite a lot of interesting material around the cave and around Staffa itself. Some of it is to be taken with a pinch of salt, probably quite literally. So the one we're looking at here is in the middle, is the Evening Telegraph from 1950. Those Scottish mermaids, the discovery of a strange skeleton on the island of Staffa will be followed up shortly by an exploration by Stockholm students. I don't know what they were smoking in the 1950s. I haven't really heard what that was all based on and whether there was any outcome, but it sounds very fishy to me. Sorry about that. It just gets better. And it does literally get better, because this is one of the least known works of literature and fiction relating to Staffa. The Vampire or the Bride of the Isles, a romantic melodrama in 2 acts, complete with kilted vampire, arising out of Fingals Cave and the basaltic columns in the background here. I never go into the cave on my own because of this very painting and advertising. There we go. Just let that play for a wee bit. Of course, one of the main links to Fingals Cave and Staffa is Felix Mendelssohn, who visited in 1829, and it's been reproduced on numerous occasions and played by orchestras and half of orchestras and bits of orchestras and people singing. If you go into the cave, you ever visit, if you go with a big tour group, always somebody will have a go at singing. So there's been quite a lot of, again, creative response to the space that is Fingals Cave. It's to do with the acoustics, which is quite good in here. So in terms of the Romantic movement, it's a place basically, as you can see, fits in quite nicely, burdened by culture. There's an awful lot of cultural references to Fingals Cave. It epitomises the main themes of Romanticism. So we have the power and awesomeness and wonder of nature, relationship between nature, art and architecture. Many people, when they visited, couldn't believe in the 19th and 18th century that it was a natural process that had formed the cave. They thought it was man-made or person-made, people-made. It was a cathedral of some form. And of course they all talk about the sublime and the emphasis of the emotional experience when they visit the cave, this sense of wonder and awe, and in some way when they're frightened by it. So it fits in beautifully with a study of the Romantic period and tourism. As I say, many, many people have been. And we wanted to know really what was the archaeological evidence for people on St Kilda. St Kilda? Staffa? I haven't seen St Kilda before, have I? It's easy to get mixed up when you've got so many islands. So with the Glasgow School of Art, the partnership work, one of the main things that we wanted to do was to do bits of mapping and laser scanning, so under the auspices of Stuart Jeffrey and Al Rollinson then when he was working for the Glasgow School of Art. And they took their scanner out and did scans all the way along the Great Face here, past the Herdsman. So if you get on the boat coming from Iona, you come along here, get off at the pier and walk along the front here. And in fact, what I'm showing you there is actually the outline of the inside of Fingals Cave running through. That's actually a shadow from the cliff above. So you can maybe start to make out the depth of it and the scale of it, which is useful to measure because in fact it's a very difficult thing. Without this technology, how would you plot the remains of something like this? You can also start to see also here just the outlines of some of the ring and furrow cultivation that is shown across. If anybody watched the BBC programme Scotland from the Air the other night, or the other couple of weeks ago, they showed the rig on Staffa, and it's this set of rig just running through there. But we'll talk about that in due course. So we've got the outline of Fingals Cave itself, all the basaltic columns running down here, so this is incredibly useful from a conservation point of view, especially because the pathway that goes into the inside, which is largely hacked out of some of the rock in the 18th and 19th century to allow visitors in, and has lots of little bits of archaeology for health and safety purposes buried into the stone there. It's quite useful to monitor change. You maybe saw that part of the access way in collapsed in the other just last year. So having a laser scan of it is really quite useful. So the point cloud here, and this is the railing you've been in, this is the pathway through the stairs up. And now you get to about here, but if you were brave in the 18th, 19th century, you get to the back of the cave, just in here. Of course, the trouble is it's never like that. But what we wanted to do was model the physical remains, but also to model the soundscape as well, the acoustic modelling of it. So what you do, set up a sound suite. And that goes right through the range of audio and of sound all the way through, and basically you can record in different places around the cave what the reflection of sound is like in there, and how that may be used to remodel or model how people experience the cave, both today and in the past. We're working on a complete video, and this will make you seasick if you watch it too long, so I'm going to skip through if I can. But this is the results of the laser scanning. Labour scanning, that's probably right, actually. The main thing to do is if you sit and do this, it feels a lot better. But we'll see how we're going to use this in due course. One of the main things is, from the recording point of view, is that we've got this range of graffiti recorded in the inside. Lots and lots, thousands of people have left their names. This is all the visitors. This is the visitor book to Fingals Cave, carved into the basalt columns. So we've done RTI recording, so moving the light source around, and as you can see, as you do that, you'll start to see that different phasing of carving and different techniques, etching and other forms of chiselling, you can start to see different names coming out when you use different resolutions and different light sources. So it's a really useful thing, and there's a whole body of information in there that we need to get on top of. The problem is working in Fingals Cave is it's not always safe. So that's us recording at the top end of the cave here. But you can see that weather conditions, even in the summer, can be unpredictable. Some of the names, none of them are going back to the late 18th century. Still haven't found a JB 1772 at the back. I'm hoping to find Joseph Banks in there somewhere, and maybe even some early Christian material, but nothing as yet. Not the vast majority, but the ones that are really very recognisable are some of the warships, basically from the First and Second World War. This is HMS Alecto. The only trouble is there's two HMS Alectos, there's probably more than two in fact, but we know that this one was running supplies up and down the west coast in the Second World War for the guys that were training to torpedo the Tirpitz over in Norway. So if you read the Shetland bus, it features in that. So the guys have come ashore, and you can maybe just make out HMS Alecto. Obviously not much to do, and you've got to go and visit as well, and these sorts of things. So here's the Quentin Roosevelt as well, and here we think that's ship, obviously. And again, moving supplies around. And HMS Nimrod, you can probably see that one quite clearly. And here's a nice one, there's names in there. Hume, carved in here. And here's a letter from David Hume, which has got, obviously the script is exactly the same. We don't know whether he ever visited, but people in those days were probably using roughly the same sort of handwriting. So difficult to prove, but there's a whole host of stories to be peeled out of that. So in terms of understanding, we looked at the archaeology. As I say, there's bits of traces of rig and furrow on the top, but there's also the remains of this early 19th century waiting room, or Bothy, where people, when they came off of a steamer, went in there for a wee genteel cup of tea. By the middle of the end of the 19th century, it had collapsed, and was getting used by occasional visitors here by McBrain workmen and then by some of the other visitors in the early 20th century. So we wanted to do an excavation around the front of this bothy, the remains of it. We opened up some test pits around the bothy. You can see the rig and furrow. So these probably, the rig and furrow relate to this structure here, a number of structures with little kale yards on the back, probably dating to the 18th century. We did some geophysics. This is the longest grass and the shortest geophysics person, that's Tessa. Quite difficult work. And then we got little test pits around the concentration of settlement, put this on Twitter and said, look what we found, thinking that people would reply to the fact that we found flint there, and somebody wrote back and said, you found a small man sitting on Daniel's hand. So test pitting, I mean, obviously test pitting is a very useful technique, and straight away we've identified medieval and later medieval dates and prehistoric material coming up too. So we went back and opened a bigger trench, both outside and inside the bothy. Most of the stuff inside the bothy, I have to say, we were looking for lots of smashed bottles and things like that, turned out to be, there was some 19th century stuff, but very little actually in the remains of material culture there, unfortunately, that we could relate to the tourism. But you know, people were visiting this island from before then. Our radiocarbon date from this is from oats, which were from the soil sample, carbonised oats, which came from the little kale yard or yard enclosure at the back of this house, came back with a date of 1452 to 1636 with a 95% probability. So that was quite nice, taking it back before 1772. I found a piece of medieval green glazed pottery, oxidised material, reduced. So probably 14th or 15th century on the path one day, just turned it over and here's this green glaze. But the main find really to date has been that we've started getting evidence for prehistoric activity. So we've got bits of flint, chipped stone, some sort of feature coming up here. This is another drone shot of our excavation. And of course this really nicely decorated pottery from that one trench that looks like sort of Hebridean Neolithic ware, if anything. And then we went back last year, opened up, extended that trench. We found what looks like the remains of some sort of ring ditch with post holes around the edge. Unfortunately, I think if there's any sort of centre to it, we're beyond it there, so we need to go back. But a mix of pottery, most of which is coming back looking like sort of middle to late or early Bronze Age, actually. So here's the ring ditch here. I'll go past that, I'll maybe come back to that. So the pottery, and it's quite nice, this little fly through here. The radiocarbon date for that one came back from about 1800 to about 1700 BC, so we're looking at Bronze Age material there. It's good that, to know that archaeology still has an input into the creative process, not just through drawing our sites and things like that, but the local artist on Iona produced this jewellery based on the basaltic columns, and then based on our find of the Neolithic pottery, she now has a new item to her repertoire, which is rather nice. So if you want to buy it, come and see me afterwards. We've got to go back and continue our excavation. Not exactly sure whether this is settlement or whether it's some sort of ritual site, whether there's a burial involved in this. Quite a range of pottery, quite broken up, a lot of charcoal around that. My hunch is that it's settlement material, but again, we'll have to go back. It's difficult going there. It's a big sort of project where you've got to carry lots of kit. You're only there for 4 days. There's no facilities on the island. You've got to take in all your water, all that side of things. So we only do small bits at a time, but we're looking at producing a larger grant application to get us out and do a bit more work on site. So really just starting to get a better understanding of human occupation and activity on Staffa. At least I think we've filled in some of that blank from 6 million to 1772. So we've got stuff in the 16th and the 17th century, medieval stuff, we've got Iron Age stuff, we've got prehistoric Neolithic, Bronze Age, and from looking at the flints, Anne Clark, I think, thinks that some of the flints may be late Mesolithic as well. So our main aim now is to tell more people about it, and we're currently working with the BBC. So we've got BBC Radio 3 programme coming out soon, in June or July, I believe, and with that there will also be a link to the website where that video that I showed you with the 3D laser scan of the cave is included, and it's going to be put to some new music composed not on the site, but in response, in fact, to the laser scan data, not to the actual visit of the site. So composed by somebody who hasn't been to Fingals Cave. So we're setting out on a project here. There's a lot to do, but the sort of link between culture and nature is something that we're very aware of. And it's good to see that there's still creative responses to places like Staffa, and it's an amazing place to work. It is a privilege to get to work at somewhere like that. So thank you very much to the National Trust for Scotland, and thank you very much to all of you for listening.